Welcome into the Michigan State Hockey Hub weekend preview. The Spartans are coming off of a sweep of Minnesota, which was kind of ugly as they were up 3-1 and gave up 5 straight goals to fall Saturday. But another Big Ten opponent ahead of us as Wisconsin's on the way. And I have a special guest today to talk about Wisconsin, Todd Milewski. Todd, how are you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, Todd is the Wisconsin State Journal sports reporter. Todd, how did you start with them? What's kind of your background? How long have you been with them?
Yeah, I've been with the Wisconsin State Journal since 2016, but I've been covering Badgers hockey since 1997. I guess was the first time I did that
Wow.
for the student newspaper here. Then I was away for a few years, but I was still covering the team with through USCHO. Came back to work for the Capital Times, the other newspaper here in town, in 2003. Covered hockey through around 2009 and got moved into some other things, but still kept working with USCHO as an editor. And then in 2016, brought back to cover hockey and been doing that ever since.
So, you've seen a lot of Wisconsin hockey in your days. So, do you have a favorite player that you were able to watch or cover even in that time?
Well, I mean, there have been some really good. I mean, I kind of tend to like look at it by position.
Okay.
Uh, Joe Pavelski is probably the favorite center
Sure.
I've watched. Wingers. Well, I mean, recency bias here. Cole Caulfield was pretty special to watch,
Oh, yeah.
and so seeing him for 2 years was a treat in a lot of those days. Goalie, boy, I mean, going back to the late '90s, early 2000s, a guy by the name of Graham Melanson played here and was a really good quality goaltender. But then there was Brian Elliott in the mid 2000s, who was a Hobey Baker finalist in '06 and kind of led the way for that team to win the national championship. Defenders, there's been a lot of them. I mean, go back to like Alex Brooks as a defenseman or a really good player. Ryan Suter played for a year with Wisconsin
Yeah.
and I mean, you could tell he was going to be something pretty big at that point. So that's a lot of names. So I can't really narrow it down to a favorite or anything, but
Yeah, and those are some legit NHL names too. That's not just, especially if you talk about, this isn't to sound negative, but MSU hockey in recent memory hasn't exactly had much star power like Wisconsin has. Um, but that's just part of it. But let's go ahead and jump into the Big Ten. So right now the Big Ten standings are as follows for those of you on Spotify who cannot see this. It's Minnesota, Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, Michigan State, Wisconsin, and Penn State. And as I'm looking at this, I've realized kind of since the Big Ten started, most of these teams have had their spot at or near the top, besides Michigan State, really. They've kind of been in the bottom recently. So even being in the position they're in right now is a little bit of a win for the program and what Dayton Cole's trying to build. But Minnesota at the top, as the Spartans saw last weekend, that's a good team. Now, Jack LaFontaine just left the team. I guess you could say abruptly. That kind of has a negative connotation with it, but he had a chance in the NHL with Carolina, who drafted him in 2016. And you don't always get a chance to play in the NHL, so I don't blame it at all. But that's going to be a tough position to fill for them. And I'm kind of wondering, do you think Minnesota will be able to hang on at the top, or is Michigan and their star power going to climb?
yeah, I mean, you have questions on all of those sides, right? Minnesota now the question in goal, um, and plus losing 3 players for a couple of weeks for the Olympics. I think they're talking about for 6 games. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's enough to. I mean, that's half of the second half of the season now. That's a quarter of the Big Ten schedule. You're losing 3 pretty important guys, and Michigan's gonna have even more. I mean, it sounds like 4 or 5 possibly,
Yeah. Yeah.
going from this year's team. Um, and so that you hate to say it this way, but that really will factor into how this ends up. You've got to think in some of those games that
Right.
I would be surprised if it's not a determining factor in who wins the league. I mean, and then you've got Ohio State. That's kind of like, okay, we're doing all right. We're right in there.
Yeah.
We're tied for second. And maybe they have, a way of stepping in and being one of the deeper teams, since they won't have as many guys. Knock on wood, you never know with COVID and injuries and things like that, but won't have as many guys out of their lineup over the second half of the Big Ten schedule. So yeah, that's a fascinating thing to kind of throw into the second half of the Big Ten schedule and see what comes out of it.
Yeah, and it's pretty open with all of what you just said. But also what I keep reminding people is, there's no more games. I don't know every schedule, but I don't think that there's any more games against non-conference, maybe one here or there for certain teams, but not for Michigan State. So you have the opportunity to climb, especially because not only if you sweep a team can you climb, but someone in front of you could get swept, or there's so many possibilities and still a lot of hockey to play. So even a team like Wisconsin that's not performing well and has seen some struggles this year, they can still it's not impossible for them to still find a way to have home ice in the Big Ten tournament or anything like that. They've got their work cut out for them, but these Big Ten standings are going to be really interesting because, as always in the Big Ten, there's a lot of talented teams, a lot of teams that will be ranked, and it's just as tough as it gets.
Yeah, the way it's kind of sorted itself out right now, you've got Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio State right in that kind of there's three bands you could potentially
Yeah,
look
they're
at.
in a different tier
That's
right
top
now.
band. Yeah. Notre Dame, Michigan State are in that second band, and then Wisconsin and Penn State are at the bottom. And so it's not impossible to move between those bands, of course, with the half the season still to play here. There's nothing set in stone like you're talking about. But I do think some teams have obviously positioned themselves a lot better than,
Right.
Wisconsin, Penn State being at the bottom. It's you'd like to think that um, there's you don't want to think that there's a clearly defined line of here's as far as you can get when you're only halfway through the league. But I think it would have to take a major change for teams like Wisconsin, maybe even Penn State, just from how they've done in conference play, not out of conference play, for them to make a jump in the second half, because of at some point you are the team that you are. And
Yeah.
I think they'll have to have a pretty big change to get away from where they are now.
And us Michigan State fans are used to this conversation. We're near the bottom. How do we climb up to maybe the middle? So even where Michigan State is right now, 10 or excuse me, 11, 10 and 1, this is uncommon territory for recent memory. So, but as we go in and we look at Wisconsin, they have 2 wins since the beginning of November. Now, of course, there's the Christmas holiday break in there as well. The Spartans did sweep Wisconsin in December, 3-2 the first night. Middendorf had 2 goals. Davidson's 2 goals led them 5-2 in the second night. How has Wisconsin looked since the last time Michigan State saw them?
Well, in that stretch in November, that the Badgers were just in a rough way of trying to get any goal scoring going. They couldn't. They were just not generating much on that end, and their penalty kill was really failing them on the other side. And so that was a bad mix. Since then, both have kind of evened out a little bit. I mean, they're not great on either one, but they're certainly better than they were at that point in November. Um, they're in their last 6 games, I think, since the start of December, they've played 6 games, and they're 2-2-2. They're averaging 3 goals a game, which is, I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but for the season, they're still below 2. So you can tell that is an improvement in terms of their goal scoring production, and their penalty kill has gotten a lot better in terms of success. And so those are some of the keys that, if they were going to kind of pull out of the tailspin that they're in, they had to find some goal scoring. Whatever way to do it, is it power play, even strength, short. They got a shorthanded goal last week. It doesn't matter to them. They just need to get something on the board, and they've been able to do that a little bit more regularly. A few more players contributing, and that has been a change in the positive direction for them. But it's still a pretty deep hole they're trying to dig out of. So I think they recognize that, but they know there's not a lot they can do about that now. They just got to focus on this back half of the Big Ten season and see what they can pull out of it.
Right. Yeah. And depth scoring is so important when you're playing teams like Michigan that have or Minnesota that have some legit NHL first round draft pick type talent that can just take over a game. When you have depth scoring that goes so far, especially in teams that are maybe not as talented player to player. Speaking of first round draft picks, there's one on Wisconsin, Corson Ceulemans, and he leads the team with 14 points. He's just a freshman, if I have that right. And a first round pick for Columbus, D-man, and he has really looked good. And you can see why, just with his skill, why he was a first round draft pick. How has the freshman settled in so far, and how's he been able to drive offense on a team that maybe isn't the most offensively gifted team?
Yeah, I think the start of his season was not completely unexpected in that, he's a young player, 18 years old, didn't get to play a ton of games last season because of his Canadian Junior League was shut down for a lot of the year. And so he was at such a high level in that league that some of the competition probably didn't necessarily help him grow. So the first few months, probably the first 2 months, October and November, were a little bit of a struggle for him, just finding his way, figuring out what college hockey is and how he fit into it. But since then, he's started to figure things out, and you can really see the confidence coming out in his game and just in the way he'll carry the puck now. He was a little hesitant to try and make any plays for a lot of the early part of the season. But you can see now he has the confidence to take the puck off the wall, try and get to the net with it. He knows he has support coming from forwards to give him some cover on the back. And I think that has really opened up a lot of opportunities for him. He scored a few goals, got a lot of points. He had a 5-game point scoring streak. Those are the kind of things that I think a lot of scouts saw in him as potential. His defensive game is still has a ways to go, and I think everyone recognized that coming into that. He came in as an offensive defenseman, but with good skating ability and a good stick. So the pieces were there to make him a good defensive defenseman as well, even though his stronger side is moving up a little bit. So I think I'm just interested to see how it goes from here in terms of, if he got this much better from, mid-November to mid-January, what can he do from mid-January to mid-March? That's in that same kind of period. We could see a really, really good player develop and someone who I don't know what his point total will be or anything like that, but someone who could really develop into and move into a sophomore season with a really good first year behind him.
Yeah, and we know that Wisconsin knows how to produce D-man. I mean, they've had like Wyatt Kalanick and Keandre Miller, and they've been able to put together some even offensive-minded defensemen. So I don't see any trouble with that. And when you come in as a freshman, it does take a little bit, but you can see flashes of the talented players. David Gucciardi, freshman for Michigan State, was one that, especially with the defense, it takes a little bit to settle in. But, you see them fire a shot that you didn't think they'd be able to get off, and you're thinking, oh, wow. And then, around this time, usually after that Christmas break, a lot of these players start to kind of find their footing, find the speed of the game, and you can really see takeoffs. So, yeah, I mean, he's definitely one to keep an eye on. Now, Wisconsin, we kind of touched on this already, but Wisconsin's offensive struggles have been pretty obvious. Right now, Tarek Baker and Brock Caulfield, Cole's brother, lead the team with 5 goals each. 6 players have 4 goals or more. So, what exactly is this offense struggling as much as it may look on paper, or was it just a really cold November like you talked about, or what can you kind of tell us about the offensive struggles for
Yeah,
Wisconsin?
it started pretty much right from the start of the season, and I think everyone had a feeling. I mean, everyone knew that offense was going to be different for Wisconsin this season because losing Cole Caulfield, Dylan Holloway, Linus Weissbach, Ty Pelton by. So take off your entire first line and your second line center. 4 guys that were on your top power play. A power play that hit at 30% last season. The guys that were dependent on the score are just not there this season. And so Tony Granato was, adamant before the season that we don't want guys to try and be something they're not. And that's an important part of this team. Because they don't have a dynamic scorer. They don't have a big time point getter. But they knew they would have to play the game a different way and try and be successful a different way. That's been harder, or it hasn't been as successful as they thought it might be coming into the season. But they, I think, are starting to figure out a little bit of the way they need to play. They had major struggles against teams that played them physical. Think of the first couple of weeks of the season. They played Michigan Tech, a bigger team, a veteran team. They played at St. Cloud State. That's a team with experience and knows how to use the body. And they just did not do well. They weren't competitive in a few of those games. And so that's, I think teams see that and they're like, well, this is how we beat a team. You get a reputation then for not being able to handle physical teams well. And I think that started to be attached to Wisconsin. It's been like everything. It's been a little bit better lately in being able to handle that. They've won more battles around the net and along the walls. And those are, how critical is that going into a weekend, having some confidence that, you're going to be able to win some of those battles, as opposed to, man, we're going to get beat up and have to figure out some other way to score. But I think that's a bit of the change over the last month and a half. And in reality, they have some players that are just kind of getting into a rhythm and finding their groove this season. And I think that's if that continues to develop, things could unlock for them offensively, but I don't think they're ever going to be a 6-7 goal a game team.
Yeah, and these players that they lost that you mentioned, Caulfield to Montreal and Holloway to, I think, Edmonton, is that right? They were legit, and that power play last year was ridiculous. I remember just watching them. It was like they were playing at a level, playing against a level that was below them somehow, which is their chemistry, and just you could tell these players are just simply more skilled than your players at a lot of times. This year, that's not been the case, and I do think it is because from what I've seen, which is a few games and some highlights and whatnot, it's most, when you take away that much from the unit, it's tough to rebuild it in 1 year and kind of figure out what you got. Right now, the power play, 14.3%. That's 46 nationally. The penalty kill, 70.2%, 58th nationally. So that's almost at the very bottom. So what have you seen from these special teams? And have they been playing better recently? Is there a way to fix this, or is it personnel, coaching? Just kind of speak on the special teams.
Yeah, the power play has cooled off a little bit in the last few games. There was a stretch there between, maybe the last week of November, and they played a series against Penn State where they got a couple power play goals and were doing okay there. Movement seemed better. And I think some of that did come along with Corson Kuhlman's being the quarterback of that power play, starting that, like we were talking about before, getting that, the light bulb went on a little bit for him. And so he was able to be a little bit more of a factor there. The penalty kill it was last in the country, dead last for a long time. And there are a lot of key players that they're asking to do an awful lot, some penalty kill and power play, and that got them into some trouble in terms of guys were on the ice too much.
Yeah.
And that's tough to get out, because when you depend on someone, you have to have them out there. That's it's whatever the situation is, and it just didn't work out. They've been without one of their main penalty killers from last year, Owen Lindmark, for a lot of the season. He's likely facing surgery, and probably won't. If that's the case, he won't be back for the rest of the season. And it's just a little pieces of a lot of things that have gone wrong for the power play. Some days it's been, they haven't gotten the goaltending performance. Some days it's, they're not, they're overcommitting along the wall, and the puck comes free out in the middle, and then it's a 3-on-1 or something like that. And it's, I think it's something that they haven't quite figured out, but they've, statistically they've been better over the last 6 games or so.
Yeah, and this is, power plays are so year to year. You really never know. Last year, Michigan State had 5 power play goals all year long, or 7. Regardless, it was disastrous. I mean, they went a remarkable stretch without a power play goal. And Michigan State had no offense. They went I remember at the end of the year, they went like 200 and something straight minutes without a goal. Like, they were just terrible. They just didn't have the personnel. They didn't have the chemistry. They've been much better this year, and you can see how much you can just change in 1 year. So, yeah, those special teams it's really tough to get them clicking, especially at this point in the year. I never want to say that so-and-so's lost confidence. I don't know what they're thinking, but when you see numbers like this, it's tough to dig out of. It really is. So, but speaking of the Wisconsin goalie and kind of helping on their power play, I need you to help me with this Wisconsin goalie situation, because last year it was Cameron Rowe, right?
Yeah, Cameron Rowe and Robbie Baydoun.
Okay.
They ended up towards the end of the year, last half of the year, basically, they were in a rotation. And
this year, Cameron Rose kind of moved into a reserve spot, right?
Yeah, they started the season. Well, they got Jared Moe as a transfer from Minnesota in the offseason. So Baydoun was he moved on. His career was done, and so he the Badgers brought in Jared Moe as a transfer, and that it was going to be kind of a 1A 1B situation until someone stepped forward. And it wasn't that someone stepped forward. It was that Rowe was having so much difficulty with his starts that and Jared Moe was giving the Badgers some consistency, that they turned to Moe as the number one. And he's played, I can't remember, it's 6, 7, 8 some starts in a row right now. So it's pretty clear that they're going with him. And he's been good. His stats aren't tremendous, but his save percentage is decent, and it's better than Wisconsin had for years. Before last season, they didn't have a goalie with a 900 or above save percentage in a long time, and you just don't get very far without that. And so there's some like I mentioned before, stability that Moe has given them this season, that they're hoping to get out of Camero too, but it just hasn't worked out that way. And I think he's kind of going back and trying to find his game and work on that part of it, because a lot of being a goalie is mental, right? And you need to be in the right frame of mind to be in that spot, and that's something that he needs to make sure is squared away too. Yeah,
the one thing that Michigan State has had recently has been goalies. I mean, Jake Hildebrand, Ed Minnie was okay, but Drew DeRitter, I mean, they've been able to string together Johnny Letherman. I mean, they've had some good goalies over the past years. Now, that doesn't always equal wins. And sometimes you see teams just be able to outscore you and have a bad goalie. So it's kind of a funny situation to be in college hockey. But looking into this weekend's matchup, Wisconsin wins if what?
I think let's continue off that if they get a good goaltending performance, because I think my sense is that these are going to be low scoring games. And I think it's going to come down to who plays better in goal. And that's, I think I was talking to Jamie Baldwin this morning from Michigan State, and she was mentioning that of the highest save performances out of Big Ten goalies this season, like the 6 highest have been by a Michigan State or a Wisconsin goalie. And so there's that capability of stealing a game, or at least stealing a game enough to keep you in it, where a goal, one goal might end up being enough. So I think Jared Moe's got to play well for the Badgers to have a chance, and they've got to, they've got to kind of continue on with what they've done lately in scoring it and being pains around the opposing goal, getting there for traffic or redirections or rebounds. Those are the kind of things that are going to be what get them their goals this year.
Yeah, and Michigan State's one of these teams that I'm sitting here thinking, hey, if Wisconsin really wants to get their offense clicking, they can, because Michigan State gives up an enormous amount of shots. If Wisconsin has 45 or 50 shots, it would not be surprising just because of how much Michigan State gives up. But the goaltending has been so good that this, it's tough to get scores, and you can maybe get some good looks, but they've just kind of outperformed those offenses with simply goaltending. But it wouldn't be impossible for Wisconsin to be able to kind of gain some confidence offensively just from getting some good looks and some good, generating some offense this weekend. But have you been able to watch much of MSU this year?
I saw, other than the games at Munn earlier this year, I saw some of last week's series against Minnesota on Friday night.
What do you think about Wisconsin, or excuse me, Michigan State from what you've seen?
Well, I think it's a team that I think, like I was just talking about with Wisconsin, needs a good goaltending performance. Yes, they can score. They have guys that can score, but I think that the foundation has to be in their own end, making sure they lock that down. That to me has always been, going back years, the Michigan State way. They're not gonna, get in a track meet with a lot of teams most years anyway. But they can be pretty good in their own end. And if you slip up, if you don't take care of the puck well, they'll make you pay for it. That's been my impression of Michigan State. And I don't know. I think maybe this season it's maybe just working a little bit better, that style, than it has in years past. And maybe there's some opportunity to, to take advantage of some openings that they've had in games this season to get the wins they've had. And so I think that's, what kind of pushes them up a notch in terms of where they are in the Big Ten right now, is that ability to lock things down in their own end in terms of, they might give up a bunch of shots, but they have the supreme confidence in their goalies to that they'll be okay through it.
And before we move on to the predictions, Mitchell Lewandowski, who generates the most offense, a super senior with that extra year of eligibility, and probably the most offensively gifted player for Michigan State, missed last week's games, and they lost both. He has missed 6 or 7 games this year, and they've won one of them. We do not know if he's going to play yet. I'm sure you understand how hockey is with injuries. Right. It's usually pretty quiet. There's not much said. I don't think he's going to play, but they typically don't put out too much news about that, unless there's something that's come out that I've missed. But
I've seen.
Okay, well, we'll move into the weekend prediction. And just so you get a good laugh, my guest last weekend predicted a split, and I hate predicting the same exact thing. So I predicted a Michigan State sweep last weekend, only to see Michigan State get swept. So Let's go ahead and hear your prediction for the weekend, Friday and Saturday.
I think Michigan State wins Friday. I think it's going to be a 2-1 or a 3-1 kind of game, 3-2, somewhere in that range. And probably a similar score, but I think Wisconsin wins the Saturday game. It's coming to a point in the season where I think there needs to be some desperation, right? You're starting to see that, look, this is, if we want to get somewhere this season, we need to turn that up. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of splits the second half of the season, because the team that loses Friday is going to have an awful lot of motivation to get that Saturday game. And so that's, I probably would end up picking splits the rest of the way, unless maybe not in Wisconsin, Minnesota series. But hey, I can't even say that, because those,
who knows what they're going to look like. Yeah.
Right. And you always, there's extra motivation on all sides for those border battle games too. But I can see anything really happening in
me too.
In
my prediction will be overtime on Friday, and an ugly one, like 1-1 overtime or something like that. Just maybe both teams are kind of struggling. I think Michigan State wins on Saturday. These games are in Wisconsin. If you've not been there, I actually went to the Michigan State Wisconsin series in Wisconsin a couple years ago. My first time there. It's a great place to catch a game. Different than Munn, much larger. So a little different feel to it, but a really cool spot to catch the game. All right. Well, before we let you go, we just want to say thank you so much for your time tonight and all of your knowledge about Wisconsin hockey. It's great to have you on. I learn something new every time I have somebody on. So thank you again, and tell people where they can find you on Twitter and your work for the Wisconsin State Journal.
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm at Todd Milewski, ToddMilewski. And the Wisconsin State Journal, our website is madison.com, and you can check out all of our coverage on there for men's and women's hockey. We try and make sure we're on top of all of that.
That women's team's good. Yeah,
they're number one in the country, although they had their series this weekend postponed because of COVID with St. Thomas, who was supposed to come here and play Saturday, Sunday series. So that changes things up for me over the weekend, but that put the focus on the Badgers and Spartans here, I guess.
Yeah. All right, Todd. Well, thanks so much. Have a good one.
Thanks. You too.